The Rolling Stones, arguably one of the greatest rock and roll bands ever, but did they really suck in the 1980s? When I think of the 1980s, I'm besieged by garish images of mullets and leg warmers, and music defined by the jangle of indie guitars or the electronic blueberry that defined the first part of that decade. That's even before we get to the gelled quiffs and panto of the New Romantics. So what then for a band as gnarly as the Stones? Asking that question, one can almost anticipate Charlie's nonchalant shrug, or Keith's smacked out drawl of a laugh, or images of Jagger with his trendy haircut and Miami Vice chinos, although still sporting a face like a chewed toffee. There was no doubt this was a time marred by the creative differences that had arisen between the Glimmer twins, so to speak, with Jagger wanting to be contemporary and relevant, and Richards wanting to stay more faithful to the band's roots, shall we say. And many argue that because of this tension, which affected the material, the band ultimately sucked in the 1980s. A decade that began with Emotional Rescue and of course ended with Steel Wheels and the Urban Jungle Tour and Bill Wyman's resignation. But I do happen to think this is a rather blanket view of this band and this decade, drawn from the fact that they were seen at this time as a bit of an anachronism. So I think the band's material becomes the proverbial baby tossed out with the proverbial bathwater. And Tattoo You is a real bubble and squeak album made from all the leftovers and offcuts, and has to be said had no right to be as good as it was. We had Start Me Up, which was a huge hit and still features in the band's well furrowed set to this day, a set that's about as adventurous as a 3-day-old curled cheese and ham toastie. And of course the tour to promote this was absolutely huge. I'm not a big fan of this tour, to be honest with you. The set list was interesting because they populated it with newer material and were unafraid to do so. I've got a couple of DVDs or Blu-rays back there that have been officially released, but I don't watch them that often. And the tour was the subject of the film Let's Spend the Night Together, which was directed by Hal Ashby, a man, of course, responsible for films like 1971's Harold and Maude, 73's The Last Detail, and 75's Shampoo. He would also go on to direct the Solo Trans project for Neil Young. But the cherry on the Stones' cake was the $50 million deal they were offered by CBS at this juncture. But they did owe Atlantic one more album, and hence we got the Undercover record. Now, this album is often much maligned. I've done a video on this record, Is It Really That Bad?, where we talk about it in much greater detail. I think the problem with that record is it doesn't really sound like a Stones album, and the fact that they refused to tour it as well, I think increased the wedge that was emerging between Jagger and Richards. By 1984, Jagger had secured a solo deal which upset Keith Richards somewhat. It really boiled his piss, I think, as Jagger was moving further and further away from that old band. She's the Boss came out in 1985, and he went off to do other things, of course, that dreadful collaboration with Bowie, as well as cavorting away on the Live Aid stage with Tina Turner. The Dirty Work album came out in 86, and it's seen by many as the worst Stones album. It does have some interesting moments. The more interesting numbers are the ones that are driven by the tension, I think, or conflict between Jagger and Richards. And Jagger didn't particularly commit to it. He was too busy working on material for his 1987's Primitive Cool album, prompting Richards to tear a leaf out of that leathery old volume and produce a solo album himself. Talk Is Cheap came out in 88, which sounds more Stonesy, I think, than anything Jagger did as a solo artist. Of course, he went on tour with the Expensive Winos, which many see as an antidote to the glitz, the glamour and day-glow trousers of the Jagger's performances. By 1989, of course, after a few tears had gone by and there'd been a healing, they had reconfigured, got back together for the Steel Wheels album, which many see as a kind of renaissance, a rebirth of this band. And of course it did spawn the Urban Jungle Tour of North America, Europe, Japan, which was absolutely huge. Many see this as being very much the start of that huge mega concert nostalgia-fueled forays that we've had to endure for many years now. Events punctuated by numerous guest stars and where the band dust off their hits for the millionth time. So let's think of the albums that this band did in the 1980s, and how would I rank them? For me, the bottom of the pile is a pretty obvious one, really. It has to be Dirty Work from 1986. This album does have some moments of interest, the intra-band animosity that bubbles to the surface in some songs like, One Hit to the Body and Winning Ugly, fizz, I think, with an energy that make them worth checking out, I think. But overall, this album is a lifeless affair, with Jagger not being very committed to it, just popping in and out to record vocals and do bits and bobs with it. And let's not forget Charlie and Ronnie were battling their own chemical addictions at the time, so you get a feeling of them all, none of them actually being there, really. This album lacks that Stones chumminess that we've had on previous records. Number 4 is Steel Wheels. Many of you would probably balk at the fact that I've put this here. It's seen as a rebirth album. There's no doubt that it has an energy and a power to it that is much welcome, I think, especially after the dreadful Dirty Work album. It is an album that has a lot of filler on it. There is a lunge for contemporaneity, I think, as well as that feral menace that we all love so much. It's interesting that we get this revival of this no bullshit band, really. This Stones, at their glorious ugly best. But I do find the writing on this record a little bit too formulaic. Number 3 is Emotional Rescue from 1980. Many see this as Some Girls Part 2. Well, it's kind of Some Girls Part 2, the disco version. I'm not being glib, I generally enjoy this record, I'll be honest with you. They say the title track was a huge inspiration for Prince. I'm not sure if that's true or not. Many saw Some Girls as a reaction to punk. This one as well has its kind of thrashy moments and its core blimeyisms, as Jagger seems to have been listening way too much to Sham 69 at this juncture, which makes a difference from the transatlantic drawl we got in the early 70s. But I love a lot of the tracks on this album, including the icy disco rock of Emotional Rescue. Many said they find Jagger's voice irksome on this, but I find it all rather intriguing. I love other songs on this, like the reggae-fueled Send It To Me, Summer Romance is a great one. But one of my favourites is the Chuck Berry-esque She's So Cold. Love the video to this as well, with some gratuitous arse-waggling from Jagger. Number 2 is Tattoo You from 1981. As I said before, this is an album that's slung together from old outtakes and has no right to be as good as it was. And we get two sides to this album, a rockier side and a more ballad side. I think the rockier side is much better, quite frankly. I do like the excellent Waiting on a Friend with the Sonny Rollins sax solo. I think that's a triumph on this one. And I would easily hold up the rockier side of this record as the essential Stones listening. Again, I don't want to talk too much about this record as I've done a video on it already. I'll stick a card up there for you. And number 1 for me, and it may be a shocker for you all, is the Undercover album from 1983. I think albums are often associated with a time or place or person, and therefore they have a special place in our hearts, which may blinker us to the quality of the record. Maybe that's the case here with me. But I love this album. I love the lavish package. And those wonderful, wonderful promo videos as well. Absolutely fabulous. Personally, I think for this album, there's a nice strain and tear between Jagger's desire to be contemporary and the kind of the old Stones sleaze. I love tracks like Too Much Blood, Undercover of the Night is wonderful. The only thing that mars it is its cutting-edge production, which now, of course, sounds a little bit flat and a little bit of its time. I hope there's the deluxe box set to accompany this album. I don't know what's in the vaults, of course, maybe some demos and stuff, and certainly those wonderful videos, but they didn't tour to support this album or promote it, which might account for its lackluster sales. I think it was one of the Stones albums that didn't even crack the top 5, if I'm not mistaken. And the very hip-hop influenced Undercover of the Night is one of my favourite Stones numbers. There you go, I've said it, that's that out of the way. Anyway, that's how I would rank the Stones albums in the 1980s. I'd love to know what you think, how you would rank these albums. And come back to the question at the start of this video, did this band really suck in the 1980s? Please leave your comments below. Please do click like, subscribe and check that notification bell. And other than that, hope you're staying well, safe, and more importantly that you keep listening.